Hello and welcome back to Monster Monday. Today's episode, we will be continuing the aberrations with the crusty creature known as the Chuul. Alright guys, I actually got out both books that I have here. I've got a 3rd edition Monster Manual and of course the 5th edition Monster Manual. And the reason why is because I found this as I was doing my research for the Chuul. I found it kind of interesting. The differences between how the Chuul is described and between 3rd and 5th edition is kind of interesting for a number of reasons. Not just like statistics wise, like not just the stat blocks. In 5th edition, they're given a little more lore, a little more context. And some of that, in some ways, changes how they're potentially used. So, in 3rd edition, there's no reference to, like, from whence they came. Aberrations being not natural, not native. There has to be some context, but there isn't. I looked like 2 or 3 times. They are also described as kind of living in slightly different climates as how 5th edition is described. Which maybe, to me, means that you can use a Chuul in a lot of different ways other than just what you might know about in 5th edition. In 3rd edition, they are described as living in a temperate or warm forest, marsh, and underground. Organizationally, they're either solitary or in a pack of 2 to 5 of them. And they are given a 3rd edition challenge rating of 7. In 5th edition, their challenge rating is 4, which is pretty significant from a downscaling perspective. And just comparing like the differences, in 3rd edition, they have an AC of 22. In 5th edition, they have an AC of 16. Looks like about the same hit points. No, actually, they have about the same hit points. Like in 3rd edition, they say 11d8 plus 44, and in 5th edition, they say 11d10 plus 33. So it's, I mean, that would probably average out to be pretty close. The claw attacks in 3rd edition do 2d6 plus 5, and the pincher attacks in 5th edition do 2d6 plus 4. Pretty close. In the description, though, in 3rd edition, let me read this to you. A Chuul is a horrible mix of crustacean, insect, and serpent. The Chuul is an abomination that lurks submerged or partially submerged, awaiting intelligent prey to devour. Submerged or partially submerged in what? A Chuul has huge pincher-like claws, 4 webbed legs, a wide tail, and a mandibled mouth surrounded by squirming tentacles. Its entire body is encased in an orange and black carapace. Although amphibious, Chuuls are clumsy swimmers and actually prefer to be on land or in very shallow water. They love to prey on lizard folk. They are known to collect trophies from their kills and bring those things to their lairs. Although most live in swamps and jungles, some have adapted to subterranean life, hunting in and near underground streams and lakes. These underground varieties have 60-foot dark vision and prey on troglodytes and unwary drow. They're sometimes in the thrall of beholders or mind flayers. Then it talks about kind of their combat approach, which is basically just ambush hunting. They have the ability to grab, squeeze, and then paralysis. That's it. No background about the Chuul. Now, we get to 5th edition, and you know, I'll be honest with you, like when I was growing up playing D&D first, AD&D first through all of them, I never really got into like aboleths or krakens or leviathan, like, you know, those uber powered like planet destroying kind of high level monsters, like just were never in any of the games that I ran, or frankly even in any of the games I played in. I mean, honestly, I could say that like for probably the better part of the first 25 years that I played D&D, I think the toughest mobs that we ever fought were like a lich, which, I mean, as liches are pretty badass, but you know, like those giant sort of alien or extraplanar kind of entities weren't really a feature in our campaigns. I'm saying that because, like, I don't know the lore behind aboleths other than the video that I made. Boop, pop up the card at this time, Bill, about aboleths, and they're cool. But I guess it's more of a recent discovery for me, learning about aboleths. But the idea that there was this ancient, like, alien underwater empire, and the aboleth was kind of the the big bad end guy of that, is kind of interesting lore that you could build off of. And that wasn't really present, at least to my knowledge, in the earlier editions, or at least it wasn't as much of a feature. Maybe it was. Maybe there were like expansions that weren't part of the monster manual that explained like underwater creatures, how they would come out with those books, or sometimes they'd be like soft cover supplements, that kind of thing. But in 5th edition, the Chuul is just a lot cooler. And right off the bat, they provide you with some lore that I think is interesting. Survivors of the ancient aboleth empire, Chuuls are crustaceans and the aboleths modified and endowed with sentience. They follow the ingrained directives of their creators as they have done since the dawn of time. So the opening introductory paragraph for the Chuul, right off the bat, gives you some context. They're aberrations. There must be an explanation for where they came from or what made them, right? And now you have that. The aboleths took crustaceans and magicked them together into some new hybrid thing. Aberration. Cool. In the primeval ages, aboleths ruled a vast empire that spanned the oceans of the world. In those days, the aboleths used mighty magic and bent the minds of the nascent creatures of the mortal realm. However, they were bound to the water and could not enforce their will beyond it without servants. Therefore, they created Chuuls. Perfectly obedient, the Chuuls collected sentient creatures and magic at the aboleth's command. Chuuls were designed to endure the ages of the world, growing in size and strength as the eons passed. When the aboleth's empire crumbled with the rise of the gods, the Chuuls were cast adrift. However, these creatures continued to do what they did for the aboleths, slowly collecting humanoids, gathering treasure, amassing magic, and consolidating power. Right off the bat, and this is totally not planned, but like just reading that gave me an idea. Like in a sci-fi adventure game, you might have a situation where like a space base, a star base or a starship has been abandoned, but it's still operating, and maybe there's like robots or AI that are keeping it going based on their last sequence of commands, and they've somehow managed to keep things going, right? And then your adventuring party like discovers this, floating abandoned ship or this star base or whatever. There are a lot of adventure potential right there. So, but that kind of thing, that kind of setup, that trope even, could be used and translated to the Chuuls situation. And I think I even kind of referenced this in my aboleth video, because I feel like Chuuls are very versatile in that respect. I think that because they're dum-dums, because they have a low intelligence, maybe that's why you couldn't make them kind of like plotting and coming up with new schemes, or like a new world order, or some kind of greater faction, alliance to bring back the aboleths. But there are other aberrations, and there are other kind of survivors from the time of the aboleths that maybe would do that. Chuul still guard the ruins of the ancient aboleth empire. They linger in silent observance of eons-old commands. Rumors and ancient maps sometimes lure treasure seekers to these ruins, but the reward for their boldness is death. Whatever riches that the explorers bring with them adds to the hoard guarded by the Chuuls. Chuuls can sense magic at a distance. This sense couples with an innate drive that leads them to slay explorers, take their gear, and bury it in the secret locales aboleths dictated eons ago. Although the aboleth's ancient empire fell long ago, the psychic bonds between them and their created servants remain intact. Chuuls that come into contact with aboleths immediately assume their old roles. Such Chuuls redirect their compulsions to the service of the aboleth's sinister purposes. So I guess in 5th edition there's a little little more background that's helpful. But it does kind of change things, doesn't it? Because the implication in this 5th edition is that the Chuuls tend to be more aquatic, right? My read on that is that they're underwater base of operations, and lairs are the ruins of aboleth places, and that they might go to the surface to like steal and kill and kidnap and bring back, but ultimately their lair is going to be underwater. Now, I do think that you could use this kind of stuff in conjunction with what we had in 3rd edition and kind of kit bash this in a couple of different interesting ways that could provide interesting adventures. So the Chuul is, challenge rating 4, which means you could easily throw Chuuls into a mid-level adventure. They're kind of geared for that. Could you use them with low level? I would contend yes, and here's how. Suppose that for a second you have a single Chuul who wandered off onto land on its, kind of programmed sort of order to find magic and find things to bring back to the lair of the masters. And it was tracking some magic, but that magic kept moving inland, and it was following this person or these adventurers who had magic, and it kept going until eventually, like, they outpaced it, and then it found itself, like, kind of landlocked. What if in that scenario it went to a marsh or a lake or a kind of a boggy, wet, damp area, and it kind of made its new home in this area? So you have this single Chuul who maybe has gone too far inland and can't find its way back. And now it's kind of made a new base of operations in this area. And it started just by gradually sort of capturing things and stocking its new little, outpost. Maybe that's a way in which you could have a low-level adventuring party come across a single Chuul. Could you scale it down to make it so that this Chuul does not kill the party? Yes. How? You reduce its hit points, you give it a lower armor class, you make its attacks far less deadly. So you could easily throw what I'm going to call, kind of an isolated Chuul into a landlocked setting. You could even have a Chuul who's in the woods. I don't see a Chuul being in an Arctic area. I don't see a Chuul being in a desert. That wouldn't necessarily make sense. Now, because I'm a genius, I could tell you this. What if you had Arctic Chuuls? What if you had some major global event, right? And I think I've used this idea before for different things, but the comet came out of the sky and slammed into this Arctic area and melted a bunch of, hundreds of feet deep ice layers and basically awoke these cryogenically frozen Chuuls. And now the Chuuls have submerged, and it's been eons since their aboleth empire fell. So now they're free from the ice, but they're like looking for what to do, and they just kind of migrate south and take everything that they can in their path as they head towards the warmer oceans and try to find their way home. So now you've got an option for, even if your campaign is set kind of in a colder area, how you can have Chuul kind of moving through. Now, high level could be a lot more fun, because Chuuls by themselves, Chuuls are not going to be a big threat to a high-level party. But if you have a bunch of them, that could be a threat. And if you have them actually kind of being urged and controlled by a greater power, like an aboleth, then maybe that could be a threat. And depending on the level of your party and the experience of your veteran players, if they're really savvy, maybe you have the aboleth, you scale the aboleth, so that it's like a young aboleth that has just kind of come into its own powers. So it's not as deadly as like one of the ancient masters. But it has a lot of Chuul followers, perhaps. Or you don't even have the aboleth in there, and you just have the Chuuls, and they are, persistent. They can breathe air and water. They could sense magic, which is effectively like having detect magic on all the time within 120 feet. So I think that these guys are very versatile. As aberrations, as large aberrations, I think they're a great potential threat. They understand deep speech but can't speak it. One last kind of variable idea is, what if you had a bad guy who essentially was kind of think of like your cultist in a Cthulhu game, right? Like, you have this insane person who believes so strongly that if they find a way to bring back the great old ones, that they will be rewarded. Now, we all know that those people are fools and that the great old ones will probably eat them as a snack. But, a zealous fanatic, whether you kit bash this as a wizard or a priest, who worships the aboleths and wants to see the return of the aboleths, and maybe has figured out a way to harness the Chuuls and to encourage them to multiply and to conduct his bidding. Maybe this same cultist, or you have a faction of these humanoids who worship the aboleths and they want to bring back the aboleths. They have figured out a way to magically control the Chuuls, and now the Chuuls are kind of reproducing in larger numbers than ever before, and they are the servants of this cult. And maybe there's a magical item that allows them to do this, not just a ritual, but maybe maybe the top-ranking members of the cult have these rings that allow them to implant mental suggestions to Chuuls, just like the aboleths did. So basically, the Chuuls look at these, human masters as aboleths because they're not that smart. And they speak to the Chuuls. They issue their commands in deep speech, and the Chuuls basically follow these commands because the Chuuls perceive these masters as sub-masters to the aboleths, but they're willing to do service to bring the aboleths back. That could be kind of interesting, because now you've created a humanoid faction that has minions who are Chuuls, that could, be a threat to the region in which the party has placed its roots, or, to be a threat to the region where the party has become heroes. And now, the party has to kind of figure out who this faction is, where are these Chuuls coming from. Maybe this cult has other aberrations as well, who maybe once demonstrated loyalty or servitude to the aboleths. So you could kind of create a whole long-running campaign option here where you introduce the Chuuls at lower levels, have more encounters with them at mid-levels, maybe reveal some of their outposts off the coasts, like coral reef outposts, and then ultimately, if the party is willing to pursue it, there's, some deep ocean aboleth ruins, and that would involve significant magic. Like, the party would have to have like rings of water breathing or potions of water breathing or just spells of water breathing, and they would have to, maybe there's a druid in the party who would, wild shape into a dolphin. Any number of fun things like that could lead to an underwater adventure. And frankly, when was the last time you did an underwater adventure? Just food for thought. I think Chuuls are awesome as aberrations. They're not too powerful, they're not too weak, they're just right. You could scale them down, you could scale them up. You could choose to link them to this whole aboleth mythology, or you could just have them be like they were in 3rd edition, which is just like, they're just aberrations, and they live in places, and they attack you. So use it for what you will. But if you have had some interesting encounters with Chuuls, or if you as a DM have used Chuuls in your games, share your stories in the comments below, because I genuinely read the comments and I respond to them. And I know that my fellow subscribers and fans also like to share their stories. So until next time, have a good game.
Hello, it's me, Wizzy. I'm back once again to remind you to subscribe and click on the notifications button, and also watch videos that are over there. And then don't forget to tune in to the next episode of whatever show you were just watching, and crafting videos and DM tips and pro tips for vlogging and all sorts of gaming things. And also you could watch Bill eat food and watch other shows featuring Bill. He made me say that because he's a narcissist. Okay, bye.